Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you an audio recording of a solo episode I did a few years ago on how to create a mini pilgrimage for grief. And this is a favorite topic of mine and something that I've enjoyed doing a number of times in my life, going on these little pilgrimages. And I'll be sharing how to do that for yourself as a ritual for grief. So don't forget to subscribe down below to this channel. Also, subscribe or follow the podcast wherever you happen to listen, and leave a rating and review. You can also make a small financial contribution if you're able to keep this podcast on the air by going to eoluniversity.com/support. So here we go with my solo episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to End of Life University podcast, where we share real talk about life and death. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wyatt, and this is episode number 197. Today, I'll be sharing with you a solo episode entitled How Grief Unites Us So We Can Stand Together in Love. And I'll get that started in just a moment. But first, I wanted to thank my newest supporter on Patreon, Diane Button. Thanks so much for stepping up to become part of our team and supporting this podcast on a monthly basis with your donation, Diane. Thanks also to all my other supporters. And as always, you can stay tuned after this feature presentation. I'll have some announcements at the end, and I'll explain a little bit more about Patreon at that time. So here we go with today's feature. Today, I'm going to talk about grief and how grief has the capacity to unite us. And if you've listened to my Mortal Wisdom series, which has taken place over the last couple of months, you've heard me mention this idea several times, that grief is one thing we have in common with every other human on planet Earth. Grief is something every one of us experiences during our lifetime. And the point I want to make today is that grief is actually something that can bring us together in a world where right now we are suffering with more division and polarization perhaps than we have seen in many decades. And right now, our entire planet, in a sense, is hanging on a precipice between survival and extinction. And it's going to require all of us coming together and working together in order to solve the problems of our planet, in order to figure out how we need to live our lives to make life sustainable for us on this planet. This is a time when we cannot afford to be divided. We cannot afford to hate one another and build walls between us. We're living in a time where we know that dark forces are actually working against our unity through social media. Fake news is being posted, hateful tweets, hateful fake articles are being posted on social media that are being put there purposely to arouse our outrage and our anger at those we have identified as being different from us. And this is a time when we need to find ways to come together and not allow dark forces to exploit our weaknesses, exploit our intolerance of others to foster more and more divisiveness in our society. So it's more important than ever that we find ways and channels for coming together and uniting, even with those who are very different from us, those who think differently, those who believe differently, even those who are working for causes that we don't support. We have to find ways of recognizing what we have in common with other people instead of focusing on our differences. And I believe this so strongly. And in all the years that I've been working in the end of life arena and working with death and dying, it has occurred to me over and over again that death is the one universal experience, the one thing other than birth that each one of us will share. The fact that we're mortal, the fact that we're only here on this planet for a short time, the fact that we have to struggle with our fears of death and dying, and also struggle with the pain of loss when those we love leave this physical realm. Those are universal experiences that will touch the lives of everyone we encounter. And so I'm making it my mission to start spreading this notion, especially since we're already spreading the idea that we need to talk more about death and dying. We need to come to terms with our mortality. And I want to add to that this piece of wisdom that we need to embrace our mortality and embrace grief and loss that have occurred in our own lives and view them as pathways and channels for greater connectedness with other people at this time in our lives on planet Earth, when we need connectedness desperately. We need to find ways to come together. And so this little talk today will be about how we can do that, how we can utilize our grief to help us find more connectedness with other people. And so first, I want to reiterate the idea that grief is a universal experience. And in fact, if you think about it, everyone you meet, everyone you encounter is grieving something, some experience, some event of life right now in this moment. If you think about it, even those who have not recently suffered the death of someone they love have probably experienced some sort of loss or another. They might have had the death of a pet. They might have moved to a new location and be grieving over leaving behind friends or leaving behind a neighborhood that they loved. They might have changed their employment and be grieving the loss of a job. They might even be facing the changes of aging and having to let go of physical skills they used to cherish and acknowledge that there are things they can't do as well as they used to do in the past. Those are all types of loss that every one of us will experience at some time or another in life. And I think we can safely say that everyone we encounter is experiencing grief on some level or another. Everyone we encounter has probably lost someone they have loved at some time in the past, even if it was many years ago. The grief that we carry stays with us forever. We don't ever set it aside. We don't ever stop being influenced by the losses that have happened in our lives previously. So keep that in mind, that everyone we encounter is experiencing grief of some sort or another. Every heart has been broken. Every person has experienced love at one time or another and has been broken open by that love. And it is the brokenness that comes to us from grief that actually makes room for us to find connection with others. It's our own broken hearts that open us up to experience and connect with other people in compassion. And that's why I've expressed before that we need to embrace our suffering, embrace our difficulties and challenges, and we need to openly accept grief when it has entered our lives, because it will open us. It will make us more receptive and more available to connect with other people. So the fact is, even when we encounter someone very different from us, someone from a different culture or race, a different religion, someone who has totally different beliefs and lives a different lifestyle than we live, we can look that person in the eye and understand that person has experienced pain in this life just as I have. That person has loved. That person has felt the pain and suffering of loss of something or someone that they have loved. Without knowing anything else about that person, we can understand that person at one time or another has been broken in some way by love and is still carrying the pain of grief with them. Now, that is huge because grief and loss, those are the most powerful experiences of life. And when we know that we have the most powerful experiences in common with another human being, that is a deep and powerful bond that we share. We may not worship in the same way. We may not eat our food in the same way. We may not live in the same kind of houses. We may not raise our children the same way, but we will experience and carry pain and our broken hearts in a similar way. So, my point here is that we actually have far more in common with those who are different from us than we often realize. And I want to emphasize the point because when we can keep that in mind, it can change how we relate to other people, and it can help prevent us from seeing other people as the enemy or as someone I need to be afraid of or someone that I could never possibly understand. We need to recognize from the outset, this is a person much like me who has the same kind of pain and fear that I am carrying at the same time. When we focus on what is common between us, we can begin immediately to create bonds between us that can help us become more united and also help us gradually and eventually work together to make the world a better place than it is right now. So even if we have nothing else in common, we can connect with other people through this common pain and suffering of life, through the grief that we experience simply by living life every day. And I wanted to emphasize as well that every wisdom tradition that we have in existence talks about grief and talks about how we live and how we carry the pain of our grief. And I have some quotes for you. First of all, from Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist teacher who writes from the Buddhist perspective. When we see that our suffering and anger are no different from their suffering and anger, we will behave more compassionately. So understanding the other is understanding yourself, and understanding yourself is understanding the other person. Everything must begin with you. So Thich Nhat Hanh is teaching us exactly what I was saying. We are able to understand other people when we're in touch with our own pain and our own suffering, when we've done our own work, when instead of running away from our own grief and pain, we have processed it and looked at it, and when we're carrying it openly and with an open heart, we're able to feel compassion for others and see the suffering that others have experienced as well. The work begins with us. It's how well we carry our own pain and open our hearts that determines how closely we will be able to connect with other people. And the next quote comes from the Bhagavad Gita, the great wisdom text of Hinduism, which says, "When he sees all being as equal in suffering or in joy, because they are like himself, that man has grown perfect in yoga." And so the Bhagavad Gita is saying that the highest wisdom we can aspire to is to see that every other human being is equal to us in suffering and in joy. Everyone is like us in terms of suffering and joy. That's the highest enlightenment and the highest wisdom we can have, is to know that we're all connected as humans through this pain that we suffer in life. And then Rumi, who is a Sufi poet, Sufism being a branch of Islam, Rumi has written, "Forget the nonsense of there and here, race, nation, religion, starting point and destination. You are soul, and you are love." And so I love that reminder from a poet in his poetic words to forget about what is different between us. Remember, each of us has a higher self and a higher spirit. Each of us suffers in this lifetime on this planet, but each of us is also a higher self, and each of us is also love. Each of us has also come here to bring and share love with others, and it's our grief and pain that enables us to share love more deeply. So remember this grief, as I said, is our broken heart, a heart broken open because we have loved and have lost on the physical plane that which we have loved. But grief creates the threads that can bind us together in difficult times with other people. Grief forms the channel for love and compassion to flow through us toward others. So this is why we embrace our own grief and how we can utilize grief to help us find commonalities with other people and to help us set aside our anger and our outrage and our frustration as we're wondering, how could that person think that way? How could that person behave that way? How could that person like someone that I think is an evil person? Instead of focusing our thoughts, our time, our energy on our divisions and our differences, we need to turn our attention toward our commonality. And again, our commonality is grief. Our commonality is our capacity for love. So when we talk about how to accomplish this, how do we utilize our grief to help us unite with other people? How do we utilize grief to help us ultimately stand together in love instead of standing apart in hatred? And so I have a few suggestions for you. First, as I mentioned before, it's very important that you do your own grief work, that you embrace the pain you have experienced in life and the suffering that you've had, and that you allow your pain and suffering actually to stay on the surface instead of trying to bury them, that you allow yourself to be a person who is carrying pain gracefully through life rather than trying to escape from it or hide from it or cover it up. Allow yourself to feel your pain and let it inform you as you go through life. And so let's talk about, how do you do that as a person who feels pain and carries the grief of pain through life? The first thing that I suggest is that you begin to notice signs of mourning and signs of grief around you wherever you go in your day-to-day life. And let me describe a little bit of what that's like in my experience, just in the last couple of days. For one thing, I went for a walk down by the beach, and there on a platform that was near one of the beach boardwalks, I saw an array of flowers and candles. And this turns out to be a shrine for a young woman who had died at the age of 21. So friends and loved ones had come to this place and put flowers there and long burning candles. There were photographs. There were all sorts of symbols of love and compassion for her and signs of their mourning and caring about her. And that was just one thing. Next, along the beach, I found a little plaque on a retaining wall for a man who had been a photographer in that area, who had often taken photographs of the beach at different times of day and was somewhat famous just in his own community for the beautiful photos he took. And he had died, and this plaque was placed on the retaining wall at a site that he often chose as the focal point for his photographs. And so, that could have easily gone unnoticed. It's a tiny plaque on a little retaining wall. But because I kept my eyes open and because I'm constantly looking for these signs of our grief and our love, I noticed the plaque and I stopped and read it. And again, I stopped and looked at the shrine. I stopped and looked at the pictures and the little posters that were hanging there. I looked at the plaque. And a little further down the way, I saw a bench, a meditation bench that had been placed on the sidewalk that also bore a plaque to a young girl who had died. And her family had purchased the bench and placed the plaque on it as a memorial to her. So just in one brief walk along the beach, I saw 3 different shrines to people who had died, all of which could have gone unnoticed, all of which I might have missed if I hadn't been paying attention and looking for those signs of how we mourn the people we love. And I'm doing that intentionally because I want to live my life in such a way that I'm always aware of the fact that death comes for any one of us at any time, and death is constantly visiting us in our lives. Therefore, we're constantly carrying the pain of our losses and our grief with us. So those are 3 things I saw in one walk near the beach. But I carry this practice with me wherever I go. And when I travel, I've seen remarkable things. I intentionally visit cemeteries often, especially in Europe. I really like visiting old cemeteries and walking amongst mausoleums and crumbling headstones that are more than 100 years old and reading what's been carved on the headstones. And those I find, yes, they're somber places, but those are also places where I feel very connected with the people who live in that community because I sense the losses that have happened here. Oftentimes I see war memorials in places where I travel, sometimes military cemeteries, but sometimes statues and other memorials where battles have taken place. Again, those are somber places, but places where there has been great love, great loss, and pain, but places where I can connect with the grief and the mourning that is taking place for the people who live there in that community. I have a way of overhearing conversations, it seems, and there have been times on my travels in particular when I have overheard someone, perhaps at a restaurant, calling someone and saying, "I just found out my mom died. I'm flying home tomorrow." And in those little moments, it's not a person that I know. It's not a person that I would actually go up and talk to because I wouldn't violate that person's space or privacy. I just happen to overhear a few words, but I send out loving energy and compassion because I understand. I understand what it's like to be that person traveling somewhere or on vacation in another country and getting the word that a loved one has died, because it happened to my husband and me when we were traveling in Venice and our brother-in-law died. So I understand. And when I catch little snippets of those conversations and I recognize that someone is in pain, I send out love and compassion. And it's not that I need to say anything to them. It's not that I need to actually approach them. It's that I feel connected to that person. I understand. I understand what they're experiencing at the time, and I can just silently send out loving kindness and compassion toward that person for the journey that they're on at that moment. So I would recommend that you become aware of these signs of grief, signs of mourning in your own community, wherever you go. Watch for them, become aware. It's really interesting when you do start paying attention, because in every city I've been in, I always find very interesting little memorials that have been left behind that surprise me sometimes, and that I would otherwise have walked by. I would have walked by a garden without noticing a plaque that said it was dedicated to someone. and that there are people who lovingly tend that garden and weed it and fertilize the plants that are there as a memorial to someone they care for. Once walking across a bridge, I happened to notice a plaque, and it turns out the bridge was dedicated to a woman who helped raise the money to build the bridge and then died a few years later. And the plaque was placed there to honor her. And I could feel gratitude that I was able to walk across the bridge because of the work of this woman who to raise money to build the bridge, and then also know that now she's no longer physically present here. And I could feel the love of all of those who must have come here and had a ceremony to put a plaque for her to honor her on that bridge. And every time I walk across the bridge, I think of her and I think of all the people who loved her that came together and honored her with a ceremony as they placed this plaque on the bridge. So those are the type of experiences that help me stay connected every day with others in my community and others in other places when I'm traveling, connected to them through our grief, through our losses, but connected by the love that we're more able to carry for one another. So I recommend that you, first of all, work on your own grief and process it so that you're able to carry it more openly and lightly, so that you feel a capacity to face the pain of your own grief every day, and then also use it as a means of connecting with other people. And you can't do this immediately after experiencing a loss. It takes time to be in a place where you can carry it somewhat lightly and more easily, and then also embrace the suffering of others. So if you are right now acutely dealing with the pain of loss, this isn't the right time for you to try to be connecting so much with other people and feeling their loss as well. But you can know that there will likely be a day in the future when that feels right to you and when you feel ready for that. And so if you are feeling the pain of your grief right now, and there may be days when it feels overwhelming to you, I wanted to read a few more quotes to you to be helpful. And from the Beatitudes in the Bible, Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And what I interpret from this passage is that your comfort lies within your grief. It's your ability to mourn and to grieve that will bring you comfort down the road. And so accept that this grief that we all experience is actually part of the gift of life, part of the gift of being alive. Ultimately, it will bring us more connectedness, more love, more compassion in our life. And we will find comfort for it down the road, even if today isn't the day when we feel comfortable. There's another little quote from Rumi, the Sufi poet, who says, "I know you're tired, but come, this is the way." And I love the reassurance of that passage that yes, we're all tired. We all get tired, but there is a way that we're journeying through our lives and we're on our path. This is the path. And we just need to keep staying the course and keep being on the path, even though we're tired. Because this path is our way toward greater comfort, ultimately toward more connectedness, more love, and more compassion. And next, I would suggest that you work on keeping in mind that every person you meet or hear about, whether you're meeting face to face or whether you're seeing something they post in social media, every person is suffering grief and pain. And now I'm talking about real people. We do know that our social media has been used in the past couple of years to trick us by fake accounts and fake people posting things that are not the truth. And so we have to use our discernment and we have to recognize that not everything is true. And particularly if we read something that instills outrage in us, that makes us feel anger and hatred toward another person, be very suspicious that that may be something that's not coming from the truth, that's not being posted out of integrity or with good intentions. Personally, I've stopped reading anything if I see a headline that starts to take me to that place of bitterness or anger toward another person or toward a group or toward a system. I stop reading it and I question, is this the right thing? Is this really what I need in my life? And now I don't read those posts and I don't share them with other people in particular. So remember that the real people that you meet and encounter are experiencing grief, but there are fake sources of information that are coming to us through the internet, and we have to be discerning and we have to protect ourselves in some ways against that. And I would say, as a rule of thumb, as I mentioned already, if you feel hatred rising within you, that's not something that you need. Whether it's coming from a real person or a bot, it doesn't matter. It's not something that you need in your life at this time. And so at least my choice is I'm deleting that. I'm not going to read it, and I'm not going to let myself be led down that path. So every real person that you encounter is experiencing grief of one degree or another right now in this moment. Keep that in mind. And so remember that the actions of another person might be influenced by the pain that they're in. And that may help you to feel less judgment and more compassion toward others in your life. And when you find that conflicts do arise with another person, ask yourself, how is this person grieving right now? What do I know of this person and their experiences? Are they suffering with loss and in pain? Are they carrying suffering with them right now that I could connect with? Can I feel compassion for them through that connection, in spite of all the differences that are arising between us? And if it's possible, perhaps you can even have a conversation with that person. Perhaps you could even ask them, what has your experience with loss been? I remember seeing a video where two women came together, one Israeli and one Palestinian, being from societies that are considered enemies of one another. And I saw these two women coming together because each of them had lost a child in some of the battles and the fighting that had taken place. Those two women touched each other on the heart in compassion for each other's loss. And as I've mentioned before, they had so much more in common with one another than they had different between them, even though the communities that they are from were at war with one another. And so once again, when we acknowledge the pain and acknowledge our losses and acknowledge that other people have pain and losses as well, that is when we can find this common ground. And if at all possible, if we're able to have conversations about it, I think we can dispel all of the walls that have been built between us through a conversation about our pain and grief, and honest discussion together. So I think that could be an extremely powerful experience that we could have with one another at such a time. And as a next step, we need to continue learning about grief and learning about suffering and loss, and allowing ourselves to keep growing in our understanding of the impact of grief. The Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Hindu, wrote, "The highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence." And it's this idea of harmony that I think we're searching for. We're seeking connection and alignment with other people, and understanding grief and learning about our own grief and also the grief of others is one of the ways that we can create harmony around us. And then through that harmony, we are able eventually to experience love and to show love towards others, to show compassion toward others who are different from us. Rumi also wrote, "Love is the bridge between you and everything." Love is that bridge that's going to bring us together, that's going to help us connect. Grief opens us up, opens up the pathway and the channel for showing love. Love will build the bridge that will bind us together. When we can act in harmony and be bound together as one human race, we can begin to face our difficulties on this planet together. We can begin to search for solutions. We can begin to figure out how we can help one another and how we can work side by side to make this a better place to live and to hopefully find a way to sustain our human race on this planet. It's going to take all of us working together to make that happen. And that's why I feel so urgent right now for all of us to find ways to connect instead of ways to be divided, to actually reject the things that pull us apart and to divide us, to choose not to spend our time there, not to spend our time dwelling on how much we dislike the actions of other people or how much we despise others because they have different beliefs and because they're championing causes that we dislike. Can we find common ground to begin with? Start with what's common. Allow ourselves to have differences and to see the world differently from different perspectives, but know that we have in common our mortality. We have in common the fact that we love others, and we have in common the fact that we feel pain over the loss of those we have loved. And that's a powerful foundation from which to begin to build change. We have to agree to disagree on some issues. We have to find peaceful ways of coexisting with those differences in what we see. But when we build a foundation that's strongly connected through our grief and through our acknowledgement of the suffering of others, we'll be able to tolerate those differences better. We will have a strong foundation from which we can allow other people to see the world differently and not judge them for it and not need to try to destroy them for it. But we will begin to find ways of building more bridges that allow us to live side by side in the same communities, in the same countries, on the same planet, and keep our different perspectives, but come together when needed to restore the planet, to restore dignity, safety, harmony, compassion for all beings on the planet. So to sum up this message I'm offering you today, to find unity through our grief and to begin to stand in love, these are the steps I recommend. First, keep your own grief on the surface. Don't bury it or run away from it, but let it inform you and guide you through life. And be willing to carry the pain of grief that arises simply from being human on this planet. Be willing to carry it with you openly so that you can use it to connect with other people. Number two, to notice signs of mourning and grief wherever you go. Begin to pay attention and look around you and see what's there. See what's happening in the world around you and feel a connection to the people who have left a shrine or a memorial somewhere. Spend a moment or two in silence and allow yourself to feel connected through the heart with those people who had someone dear to them die and who are now leaving behind a shrine in order to honor the memory of that person. Number three, keep in mind that every person you meet has suffered. Everyone has grieved, everyone has loved, everyone has lost something that they have loved or someone that they have loved. Keep that in mind and hold that steadfast in your mind so that before you judge another person, you stop and ask yourself for just a moment, how has that person suffered? What has life brought to them that may have caused them pain? And how are they feeling that pain right now in this moment? And how might pain be affecting their behavior? Next, when conflicts arise, ask yourself again, how is pain affecting this conflict? My pain, that person's pain, and what can we do to address our pain together? If possible, have a conversation with the other person if you're face to face and ask the question, how are you hurting right now? What grief have you experienced in your life? How has that process been for you? Next, focus on harmony and remember that that's what we're looking for, unity and harmony. We're looking for ways to connect. So keep your energy always in that state of moving toward connection rather than division, of moving toward other people and finding commonality instead of focusing on what's different or what you dislike about other people. And then finally, allow your heart to be an open vessel for love and compassion. Let love create bridges between you and others. Look for ways to build those bridges and to make them stronger wherever you go. So, in this time on our planet, when we're being pulled apart in many different directions, it's going to take all of our energy and all of our focus to resist those forces and come together and come toward one another. But that's my wish for you, that you find within you the strength and the courage to open your heart to your pain and also to the pain of others, and that you use that pain to create bonds, strong bonds that can help us heal our differences and also help us heal our planet. And I'm here. I want to use my message about death and dying and mortality and as a positive step toward actually making life better on the planet, toward finding ways that we can connect with other people more deeply and more powerfully. And so that's my wish for you as you go forward from this moment on, that you find ways of connecting through your grief and through your love. So I hope that you found that helpful. And as we close for today, I just have a few announcements again, reminding you about the beautiful Dying Expo that's taking place November 2nd and 3rd in San Diego. And if you go to beautifuldyingexpo.com, you'll find forms there where you can apply to be a vendor and set up a booth in the hall. You can also be a presenter and present a workshop for the expo. You can register to be an attendee as well, and I'll be there and I'd love to see you there. Then also, I'm co-teaching a course this summer starting July 9th called Spiritual Journeys in Chronic Illness. Terry Daniel and I are teaching that class together for Redlands University and the Applied Wisdom Institute. You can go to this link. It's a shortened link through bit.ly. So bit.ly/chronic illness course. And you'll find information about the course there and also a form for registering for it. It's an 8-week course with 2 sessions per week. It'll be an extensive course, but it's going to be fantastic. I'm really excited about teaching it. If you'd like to learn from us, go to bit.ly/chronic illness course. And you can also go to EOLUpodcast.com, and I'll have a link for the course in the show notes there. Also, if you'd like to listen to past episodes of this podcast, go to EOLUpodcast.com and you'll be able to scroll through all the previous episodes and pick out the ones you'd like to hear, and you can listen on the page. You can also subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spotify, and get the new episodes on your smartphone so you can listen there. Thanks again to all my Patreon supporters at patreon.com/EOLU. I appreciate all of your contributions so much for helping keep this show on the air. There'll be a new episode every Monday. Right now I'm alternating solo episodes with interviews. So next week will be another interview, and I'll be talking more about grief next week with grief counselor and psychologist Sherry Cormier. So tune in next week to hear a little bit more about grief. And until then, remember, we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings your way, and love this life of yours right here and right now while you have the chance. See you next week. Bye-bye.